Okay, hi everybody. Um, I'm starting a new video series, and this is the first one. I'm calling it Rainbow Reads, and I'll tell you why. But first, I want to just invite us into presence so we can kind of hang together in a more palpable, energetic sense, even though we're not in the same physical space. So, if it's cool where you are, you can close your eyes and just take a moment and let the next several breaths just be kind of like magnets of your attention, your awareness, your presence, your consciousness, your embodiment. And just breathe in a way that is invitational, inviting yourself back into your body, into the moment. And as we come into our bodies together, I also invite the spirits to please be here with us. All of you who may be wise and loving and compassionate and interested spirits that have stakes in me or any of my potential audience, whether those be folks joining us now live or folks joining later via the recording. I invite you to be here with us and hold us well and help us to feel that we are being held in an energetic space together, that we are being supported in this experience of listening, of receiving, of learning, of exploring and growing, and help us to move forward from this call in a way that we become better participants in that way in every aspect of our lives. Help us to really do this work, whatever this work may reveal itself to be, in a way that is good for life beyond the humans and including the humans, life on this planet Earth. Particularly invite forward those stakeholders who hold the astrology that can help me to really feel into and interpret from a good and healthy place those zodiac teachers and planetary and star teachers, and the most essential elements that animate the astrology, the oldest ancestors of earth and air and fire and water. I invite you to be here with us and hold us well and work through us and just help us to do this work in a way that we become more elemental participants, less caught up in the bullshit that we bring as participants of humanity from, our particular cultures at this particular time. Nothing against them, but they are full of bullshit often. And more resonating on that level of, does it work in the realm of the elements? Does it work in the realm of just matter, spirit, brass tacks? Are we being harmonious or not? Help us to really feel that we can be those participants. We just maybe need different perspective, different invitations into our lives in a new way. So with these energies gathering round, I invite you to just kind of envision that you're being held now in a ritually contained space. And imagine that that space of your body and this non-local space that we share is resourced by the earth rising up, supporting you underneath whatever you're sitting or standing on or lying on, and resourced and blessed and protected from above by the divine, by the cosmos, by the great consciousness that we may call God or spirit or any other names we may know for it. And let these energies of the earth and the heavens mix and mingle within your body and bless and protect you and swirl and alchemize within you. And take some breath in a way that allows that to happen better and facilitates that, not just now, but throughout the rest of the call and perhaps the rest of your day and life. And when you feel ready, you can pivot towards a more conversational consciousness. May what needs to be said be said. May what needs to be heard be heard. And may these proceedings proceed in a way that is good for all of life. Okay, so this is Rainbow Reads. This is a new iteration of my podcast, and I'm going to do it every like 20th or so as we transition through sun signs. There's a lot of astrology that's practiced around the moon cycles, and I think that's great, but the sun is also a thing, right? And I love the sun because it's this big explosive you know, ball of gas, basically. I can relate, which is giving all of its light and warmth, and from my experience, its love to all beings equally with no prejudice at all times, basically. And basically, our relationship with the sun is only shifts as we pivot around it and as we pivot on our axis, right? But it's always there. It's like sort of this big pulsing source of life in our little corner of the cosmos. And I love it because as I was doing chart readings this past week with clients, I was feeling into how the chart itself is kind of like a lens, and the light of consciousness or incarnation or energy or whatever you want to call it kind of beams through the lens and illuminates different themes and signatures in different areas of our life. And so, as I was thinking, what would I call this podcast where I want to just dip in before each sun sign season and talk about them and talk about what's coming up? I was like rainbow because it's like a rainbow, and there's no, you know what I mean? There's no one color that's better than the other. It's all just this beautiful spectrum, and it's all one. It's all part of the same oneness. So, I also want to shout out my friend Rainbow, who has a business called Rainbow Chrysalis Coaching. They're like a gender doula and a counselor, and just an incredible person. So, I'm kind of biting your name right now, Rainbow, but hope that's okay. So, I want to talk about what's happening over the next solar month or so as we move into Aries season this week. Um, and this is 2024, in case you're like listening at some other time. So there's a few kind of crunchy slash juicy things happening, and some of them have been going for a bit. So I just wanted to kind of dip in. So before I do that, the purpose of this, what's coming forward for me about relaunching my podcast or whatever you want to call this little transmission. Um, so when we look at the sun, what is the sun illuminating? Um, I think it's a way to come into relationship with what is being asked, what is being given love, and being asked to grow. Because as I was reading a chart this weekend for a client, I was like, wow, it's just really interesting. We think of it so simple, but the sun moves over a corner of our chart and it really lights that up. It's like, and we kind of take it for granted, but that is the seasons. That's literally how life happens on this planet is the sun shifts over parts of the planet during certain times, more than others, especially depending on the tilt of the planet. And thus we have summer and winter. And there's something so primal to that. So I just found that really interesting. I wanted to play with that energy. But the purpose of divination and astrology in general is, for me, there's a few key things that we can take away from that and harvest moving forward in a good way. And just for context, I'm going to try and keep this really short. So that's why I'm talking kind of fast. But let me kind of ground and slow so that we can like bend time a bit. I just don't want it to stretch on and be like a 90-minute thing like I used to do, because it's just who's got time for that, right? So the purpose of divination for me, it's an illumination. So if I think of the sun as like one face of the divine, who's like a very big physical face of the divine, and it makes sense that the divine is often fashioned in line with the sun, or there's a lot of sun gods, and the moon is really important too, and the earth is really important too. And I'm speaking of them all in balance and concert, not putting the sun over any other. But when we talk about divination, what divination means, it means receiving information from spirit, from the larger intelligence, from consciousness. And in the chart and astrology, the sun is one place where we locate that sort of sense of like, what is the body that the rest of my life is orbiting? What is the themes that like my life is painted with the broadest strokes? So that regardless of whether I'm a banker or a lawyer or a sex worker or whatever, political dissident, I'm still an Aquarius or an Aries or whatever. So the sun has, I think to me, it has a lot to teach about divination. So the purpose of divination, receiving information from the divine and from consciousness, or whatever you want to call the divine, is there's a few purposes. One, it's perspective. So I think that there are perspectives available to us through divination that we can't get ourselves as humans, just with our own minds. I think we actually sometimes do need to expand out of our own mind. There's a lot to be said right now, especially when there's a lot of people trying to manipulate our sense of self and truth and manipulate information. Um, and manipulate people's actions based on that, to be like, the truth is always inside you. But that's also kind of a lie. The truth is not just inside you. Like, we are not individuals, that we are, as much as we are microcosms, that also means we're in relationship with the macrocosm. So if we just rely on my own individual ego for the truth, that's not really going to make sense for people living halfway across the world who are having completely different experiences, who may have different abilities or different, perspectives, like it's, and different needs and different desires and that kind of thing. So for me, the perspective seeking outside of myself is really key, learning to do that in a good way, seeing things with spirit's eyes, seeing things from the perspective of the cosmos. I love astrology particularly because it helps me to depersonalize a bit when I'm taking things overly personal. It helps me to remember, oh, we're all having this adventure. And Saturn's crunching up someone's area, an area of everyone's chart. It's just different. And the moon is aspecting harshly with some, everyone's going through some kind of thing. So it helps me to kind of pan out a bit. It also helps me to pan in when I need to and scale in on something that's really key. But I also find it really meaningful and I find it really interesting. And so for me, I think meaning making is a thing that we often tend to forget about. Like, we do things in life not just because they have this like materialist value, but because they have like an emotional or a spiritual meaning for us. They don't have to necessarily make sense to be meaningful and to be good. So I also want to make space for that as well as being a key piece of my divinatory practice. Sometimes it's just, for me, it's imaginal, like the spirits will animate the chart and animate the astrology in such an interesting way. And I just find it really cool. It gives me a place to play with my imagination and have it seem like it has a function and feel important and valuable without just being kind of just like open-ended random imaginal, not that there's not place for that too, but it has its imagination with weight, its imagination brought into reality. And that's the last thing, is we take action with spirit guidance, we take action from our divinations, and that's the true function of divination. It helps us live our lives in a better way, helps us bring that new perspective into life in a way that we actually change the way we act. And there's ways to do that in really gnarly ways, right? Like if you put too much trust in an astrologer and you're giving away your agency, say, to a spiritual teacher or something like that, or to your relationship with maybe one particular spiritual tradition or path, that can be really destructive as we see religious violence. I mean, we're all in the grips of religious violence in some form wherever you go, unfortunately, on the planet right now. But to learn how to take with a grain of salt and to root divination, root received information from spirit in your humanity, in your sense of current reality, in your sense of ethics, and like your embodied sense of what feels good or not, what feels safe or not for the people around you and for yourself. That's, I think, like the real task before us. So for me, that's how, to borrow a term from Aidan Wachter, who's an author that I really like, that's how we learn to weave faith, is by listening and working with spirit. And then we start to kind of come out of this kind of passive, like, oh, this is in my chart and I'm just cursed, place where we can actually unpack the things in our chart, unpack the transits happening collectively, and actually, do good from them, harvest opportunities from them. So that's what I'm trying to do always. And that's definitely what I'm trying to do with clients. And that's what I'm trying to do with myself as a spiritual practitioner, shamanic practitioner. So what's happening in Aries season the next 30 days or so? Um, so there's like some eclipses, and those are really important. And there's also Mercury retrograde, and that can be a real, disruption. But I'm not really going to focus on that. I'm actually going to focus on these more long-term transits that the sun is illuminating as it transits through Aries. So if you're not super familiar with the zodiac is a wheel. So everyone has all the signs in their chart in a particular house. Your house is based on where your rising lands. And so I read whole sign houses mostly because it's easier, whether it's more traditional or not, which means wherever your rising is, that whole sign becomes your whole first house. So just Google where your rising is, and then you can chart out what house Aries is. Pull your chart from astro.com. You can see if you have other planets in Aries. But for me, I'm just going to be reading generally into some of these themes and letting that kind of harvest our opportunity today. So Chiron is in Aries right now. So that's going to be illuminated by the sun's transit through Aries, as is the North Node. And the North Node and the South Node transited past Chiron in this past like few months or so as well. So just something to think about. I'm going to actually peek at my ephemeris and make sure that I'm being accurate about that. Yes, it did. So actually they're kind of still right on top of each other. So here's a few things about those two placements. So Chiron for me is a teacher. He's a small asteroid that we often consider the wounded healer. And he or they is this really interesting alchemical teacher for me about where we are incarnated with a particular calling in life that is maybe on a more subtle or intimate level than other placements in the chart may expose. It depends on where it is in your chart, but how I think about it is this: Chiron is always somewhere. And so every generation, every baby being born right now is being born under Chiron and Aries, which means they're all being born with these questions at play in the collective. What is the meaning of humanity? Should we still be having children? Are there enough resources for us? Are there enough resources for us to do something besides just being like a consumer or a creator in these very particular ways? Or doing things in a way that, like, say, social justice world says we should be doing it, or blah blah blah. Whatever belief system is most dominant in our field. Chiron is really asking the question around the meaning of a life and the meaning of humanity. So natal Chiron, where it was when we were born, often shows us where we have this access to a certain sensitivity or proclivity generationally. And he's got a pretty irregular orbit. So he moves like, it could be like a few years, it could be like up to maybe 10 or 12. Sometimes like Chiron has been in Aries since 2018 and is going to be there until 2027. So that's 9 years total. He's going to dip in and out. But yeah, it's like it's a long, long stay there. So everyone born with that generational placement has the same kind of question to unpack, and it's going to be different based on what other planets aspect it and what other circumstances surround it and what house it's in your chart, etc. But the idea for me goes back to my experience of shamanism and shamanic birth tending, particularly, which is that we basically are meant to have, like, just like when you're a baby, you're meant to have your umbilical cord severed in such a way that it doesn't get infected. Otherwise, it can actually kill a child or like to deform a child, cause a great harm to a child if we don't tend that first wound. And so, energetically, spiritually, we also have a primary wound when we incarnate. We leave the oneness and we become a body. It doesn't mean we're separate from the oneness, but it does mean that we are distinct in a way that is not the same for a spirit. Because when you don't have form, you're all over the freaking place. Time, space, they have the different relationship when you're disembodied. So I can perceive from my relationship with spirits. For me as an individual human on this planet in this body, it's a really different vibe. So same deal with the belly button. We needed to have tended that energetic, spiritual umbilical cord, that transition. I think of it as sort of this transition through like the birth channel spiritually of the soul, which is souls are huge, infinite, vast, wise, many lifetime, not bound by time or space energies. And then they come into a physical human body and it's like, oh God, I'm just like stuffed in this little clown car. How the hell am I supposed to do this? And that's part of why being a baby is so freaking uncomfortable. Plus, your body is so new. You're learning all these new things about your body in those first several years of life, even in those first several hours. The nervous system is so fresh and raw. And there's such a transformation that happens from infancy to adulthood. So, Chiron in Aries is like a double stamp on that energy and that quality and possibility. And I just find that really interesting um, because of some of the themes that have come up since Chiron has been in Aries. You've seen this increased scrutiny on women's bodies and birthing bodies that have wombs, and the legislation around abortion and against abortion and the accessibility of even just simple birth control, because there's this kind of obsession and this kind of crazy projection and control energy that's put on other people's bodies and birth and on infancy. It's this sort of idealistic like fixation on the one hand, while on the other hand, in the shadow of that, because it's coming from a wounded place, coming from a place of where none of us had our births really tended. None of us had our childhood really tended, anything like that. It's actually becoming this kind of thing which actually makes things way less safe for birthing parents and for infants, right? For the possibility of children, even when they're greatly desired, and even the people that are having to go to great lengths to have children, like through a form of like IVF or something like that, they're finding less access to that because of this legislation. So it's one of those tricky things that I think is so rooted in this transit at this time of Chiron across Aries, where it's really coming from this great confusion around what it means to be a human, period, where we don't have a good story about that in our culture. The stories that we do have about that are crappy. They're either like hyper capitalist, you're just here to be a machine and just fucking make shit and make money and hopefully survive, or they're very hyper Catholic or Judeo Christian in some way, where it's like you're just here to be a good person, based on this interpretation from this very controlling religion from like 2000 years ago that was actually born out of a land that most of us don't have any relationship with. That also brings me to the question of the violence in the Holy Land right now and the genocide being perpetrated against the Palestinian people. Aries is the sign of the ram. And so this is an old archetype, right? This connection between Aries, the ram, and the child. These are sacrifices that were made in these old earth-based and land-based forms of not just like pre-Judaism, but many, many different like polytheistic and animist traditions predating all of that stuff, going back thousands of years. And so there's a real connection there with Aries being the first sign in the zodiac, the sign of birth, and how that is in some way like a gateway that we need to tend through sacrifice, through the sacrificial ram. And so just something to think about there. So what happens when we don't have a good story about what we're here to do as humans? Well, one thing that happens is we kill people because we project this sense of I'm not good enough onto other groups of people or other individuals, depending, if we're talking individually, we project it onto other individuals. If we're talking culturally, nationally, we project it onto other groups of people. And I think it all roots from this deep flawed, wounded misunderstanding. Really, what it is a wound that has never been tended. That humans are here to have both an individual and a collective adventure, that every human is sacred, um, which is one thing that people get right, right? It's like every human is sacred, but that they each have a really individual destiny and they each require a lot of different individual unique things in order to actually do their human thing. So my soul's purpose is going to require me to have different stuff in place than yours and yours and yours and the next person and the next person, etc. And there's a lot of tension there. And that tension lands us in a physical reality that where even in the best of times, it's hard to procure food and shelter and warmth. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to be a human. A lightning bolt can fucking strike, drought can happen, even if you're not being kind of manipulated into false scarcity and all the crazy challenges that we face in the contemporary world based on all of this misunderstanding that has created such ugly human denying, life denying culture. It's still hard, even if you're like in this blissful hunter-gatherer Eden, it's still work to do what you do, and there's still conflict. And so without that understanding that every person is on their own path of destiny and that that is both like a individual and a collective experience, and without a cosmology that's big enough to hold us in that, and without the tending through ritual and sacrifice, which Aries being that first gate of sacrifice where we want to be tending the birth ritual and the birth experience, we just make horrible choices. So I heard someone I was kind of doom scrolling, or not doom scrolling, but just kind of mindlessly swiping the other day. And I heard someone be like, well, there's so much narcissism in the world today because um, all these souls are coming to Earth and they're so young. Now that is bullshit because on a soul level, time and space don't really exist. So your soul has already incarnated through every life it's ever going to really experience, basically. So on an energetic level, even if we're talking in kind of like an undead, potentially like dubious cosmology that's just working with maybe like the Akashic records or something like that without any sort of like earth grounded traditional framework around it, holding it. I'm still just like, that doesn't make sense, you know? I mean, like, doesn't, but you know what does make sense? You know why people are really fucking narcissistic right now? Is because their toddlerhood was not tended. That's an emotionally toddler state. As a toddler, you're supposed, the world revolves around you. You don't even yet know that your parents are separate from you and your needs are primary and everyone around you is responsible for those needs. And unfortunately, we live in such a crazy time that our most precious humans, the babies, their needs are not even getting met. And if you meet really rich people, their needs were not met either. I will tell you from experience of people that even if their physical, emotional, physical, like material needs were met, not all of their emotional needs were met. So that's what really creates this primary narcissism that you see. There's also just this big misunderstanding around what it is to be an individual. We really collapse into an extreme, which is a very Aryan, not like national, but Aries theme of collapsing into one extreme or the other. We have this like real, because Aries is that first explosion of life and consciousness and awareness. So a real peak Aries signature person, like myself, I have a big Aries stellium, is like, here I am, and I'm me, God damn it, and I'm nobody else. And I don't want to do anything the way that anyone else does it, you know. And sometimes in the shadow of that across the wheel is Libra, which is like, but I'll do it the way you want me to, you know, and I'll be myself in a way that is, you know, maybe in reaction to the ways that people are telling me to do it, and so it becomes really false in that way. But so the idea of individuality is really, you know, from a zodiacal perspective or from a more holistic cosmological perspective, individuality is you are the microcosmos. We are in relationship with others that are outside of ourselves. If I'm a completely unique individual, so are you. So we all deserve that same support and space given and resources given. And granted, frankly, we're all given that physically. Like there's not, I mean, there's a lot to be said around questions of like ability and stuff like that. But from a soul level, we all have the same mechanisms working to get us from soul into body. And regardless of how crazy climate change or whatever else on the world planet is happening, that mechanism doesn't break. So the soul is just coming in regardless, right? It's like it's all still happening. Things are incarnating constantly at all times. Microbiota, grass, trees, animals, plants, humans. Like it's all, sons are being born, sons are dying. So that mechanism is not broken. What's broken is our understanding of cosmology, of humanity, of our place in the things. So this is the opportunity with the sun transiting past Chiron and Aries and illuminating that for us. And that's been the opportunity for every Aries season since about what, 2017, 2018. That's been the opportunity for anyone born with Chiron and Aries to unpack throughout their life. So these are just things to think about and unpack. Questions you might ask in your practice are, what does it mean to be a human? And how do I situate my individual self in that? um what does my cosmology teach me about the purpose of being a human? And if it doesn't, where can I resource from, not to just blandly appropriate, but like, or just kind of appropriate wholesale from someone else's cosmology, but maybe you can let that be spark your own cosmological, you know, deepening of your own understanding of your place in the world. Because if your life matters, if you have a purpose here, if you, you know, it's kind of like by extension, when we look at the phrase Black Lives Matter, like it's not that that negates other life, it actually makes all the lives more precious. So if we really unpack that, are we living in that way? If I am living in a way that Black lives matter, I need to be living in a way that my life matters too. so that I can be using my resources equitably for the manifestation of my purpose. Because if I'm doing that, I'm going to be making space for other people to be doing the same. It's kind of like the ramp idea, right? It's like I have to I have to be good so that I can also like tend those ramps that other people might need who have different access and abilities and prejudices launched against them, who are experiencing different violence than I am. But if we're all here kind of beaming and welcoming that sunlight energy individual collectively in some form equitably equally, if we're all equal under the sun truly, then how am I supposed to be living, right? And where have I kind of let those false stories about what it means to be a human been seeded into me? They might come up as trauma stories. They might come up as sort of nihilism and despair. You see a lot of the nihilism too in people like Netanyahu and Putin. It's that hyper narcissistic, I'm just going to destroy this thing because I think it's going to make me feel safer, feel more powerful thing. We all do that on some form, whether it's an act of checking out from our life force or avoiding, repressing, whether it's an act of acting out from this kind of intensity or life force energy or creativity in a harmful or violent way through an addiction, or just kind of not doing the thing that we're here to do because it's vulnerable, because it's probably not going to make money, because it won't make me a good person, because people on Instagram are going to think that I'm, being a dilettante for making my art while people are dying halfway across the world. And shouldn't I just be like going to chain myself up against to an ICE facility or who knows what? You know what I mean? It's like we have to come back to that inherent goodness and possibility that every person is born with. That spark that is the thing that animates you, even if your brain dies. You know what I mean? That thing that keeps your body going. It's a really embodied experience. And so we have to do our activism from that place. We have to do our life from that place. Now, to complicate this picture even more are the lunar nodes. So the lunar nodes are a mathematical point that we calculate. It basically shows us where the eclipses are. And I don't necessarily use them so mathematically. I just kind of look at them on the chart and see. I work with them as points in and of themselves, similar to how they work with them in Vedic astrology, where they're thought of as the dragon of the moon. So the north node is the dragon's head. The south node is the dragon's butthole or tail. I like to say butthole because it's true. Because the south node is constantly digesting and metabolizing and leaving a trail of waste in our wake. And so they think of this on a karmic level in the Vedic astrology. And I think of it too because I work with past lives and I work with the soul in my practice. So on a karmic level, this is where we're metabolizing our knowledge from past lives. The north node is the head. This is where I'm devouring what I need, the experience that I need from this life so that I can grow. In terms of that big time displaced, non-local, atemporal adventure that my immortal soul is on, that is really in service to the whole collective soul, learning and growing about itself. So when I think of that, I think about how you learn a lot from your poop. So if you don't look at your poop, you may be missing or smell it or et cetera. If you're really kind of in denial about it in a very Chiron and Aries way about it, then you might be missing something really important that your body's trying to tell you about what you're consuming and how you're digesting it. So it might not just be that you're consuming the wrong things or maybe at the wrong times, but also that you're just not, your digestion is not functioning, et cetera. So I think of that, in the popular astrology, you hear people say things like, well, the south node is what you're here to release because you already figured that out in previous lifetimes. I don't think that's actually true. I think the south node is all that you bring into this lifetime from your past. It's also a field that is always behind you. So whether that's your karmic past or your ancestral past or just your literal physical childhood in this life or just yesterday, it's a field. You can think of it as the yin field behind you. So it's always kind of being cast by where you're directed, right? So if you're looking in this direction, the field is behind you in a different way. So I think it's what's behind you, it's your rear. But I think we're always trying to bring that forward into the appropriate context of the present in service, because this is what we do with oppositions in the chart, right? We hold them in balance. We don't just pit them against one another if you have a holistic cosmology. which most of us don't, which is why most pop astrologers are kind of like go to this extreme place where it's like South Node, release all of these themes, let it go. No, I say metabolize those themes through your current experience. If you have a South Node in Libra, you have a real sense of the collective, a real sense of other people in the room with you. It's almost hard for yourself to individuate yourself from the whims and the energies and the desires and needs of those around you and from that kind of social sphere of things, which is a great gift, especially for those of us like myself who have South Node in Libra, who speak to large groups of people for a living. You know what I mean? So some astrologers would say we should just stop doing that. You should just be a hermit. Your North Node is in Aries. My North Node's in Aries in the third house. I should just go practice yoga in a cave all day. And granted, I tried that basically in my 20s to the degree that I could, and it didn't work. So I always have to live in balance, is what I've found with the South and North Node. I want to bring that theme, that energy or signature from the Libra, which is where our collective South Node is right now, into context with my North Node and Aries focus on the immediate present moment, on my physical body, my physical drives, on how I'm devouring my experience and how what I'm experiencing in my life, on the choices I'm making, the ways I'm applying will. And I want to put that in context with Chiron too, that we're all here with a reason behind it. We're all here with a purpose and with a lot of possibility and potential. We're all inherently innocent, so that I can actually let that focus that's being pulled by the North Node bring me into relationship with the things that I really need to learn. And there's going to be friction and tension there. It's not going to feel necessarily comfortable or pretty or anything like that. Balance is always kind of a wiggly wobbly state of being, as you know, if you do any kind of physical practice where you stand on one leg. So the eclipse that's coming up, and the eclipses that are coming up, you can go Google around about those. They will be illuminating these themes very, I think, primarily. So just kind of look at that. But the invitation of the lunar nodes too is also into that depth place in my cosmology where at a physical level, you need soul growth. So the moon in the chart is about our physical needs, our deep interior, our sexuality, our sensuality, our psychic realm, that kind of stuff, our intuition, our gut level feelings. But the dragon of the moon, the north and south node, that's a dragon. Dragons tend to crystallize for me essential themes, and they bring these huge things. Like the moon is connected to all other moons all over the cosmos. Every moon that's ever been lives in the moon. It's a huge constellation of energy. Even while we try to crystallize it in a particular place in the chart, the dragon of the moon for me is the teaching that, and it's a being as well that you just can work with as an energy or a spirit, but it's also the teaching that our deepest need, you can have all your physical needs met. You can have, water, shelter, love. You can have $1 billion in your bank account, but your deepest need is your soul's need, why it came here, to keep scratching on the door of that question throughout its life and to grow through mistakes and foibles and strange experiences and coincidences and tension and conflict and stuff like that. Now, ideally, we have a cosmology that holds us in that and helps us to tend that ritually in a way that we don't make our soul's need something that we're pursuing at all costs for the environment and the people around us, which we see not just in people like the dictators waging wars right now, or even sort of the petty bureaucrats that are enabling those wars, but you also see it in like people like these glamorous billionaires, like Elon Musk and people like that, who are like, I'm doing my soul purpose, I'm doing my thing, I'm an innovator, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a visionary. And it's like, yes, all those things you may be, but you're doing it at a cost of billions of tons of carbon a year, doing it at a cost of all your employees, all the people downstream who are paying for your excesses and extraction and exploitation. So we kind of want to notice where we are like that as these transits are being illuminated, and recognize that that just doesn't come. It's not to say that Elon Musk or Vladimir Putin or whoever the fuck is a bad person, though they're doing bad things for sure, demonstrably so. It's to say that those are coming from deep wounds. right? Those are coming from deep misunderstandings and from immature egos. And so we really want to be growing and maturing our own egos and tending our own wounds. So North Node pulling spotlight there, Chiron in the chart and Chiron collectively, this is what we need to be tending for our children so that they can form this into medicine. So Chiron in a personal chart, this is that medicine born of a wound or a sensitivity that drew in certain experiences so that I could grow and cultivate that toxicity into medicine throughout my life and share it with the world, maybe in an intimate way, maybe in a subtle way, maybe just through my embodiment. It depends on where it's placed in your chart. Maybe in a social way, like in a career, it really just depends. But so when the people that have that similar wound signature really need you, you can show up and help them and not instead just kind of trauma bond and make it all worse and pour salt on it, which is often what we often do. I have Chiron and Gemini, for example. Issues of belonging are really key for me. And sometimes I trigger the shit out of that in other people when I'm not tending that carefully for myself. Though that is also how we grow in seeing that, oh, actually, I just othered you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So, how can I track that othering back to an othering that I've experienced internally and tend that in such a way that I don't do that next time, that I actually welcome you into my rainbow sphere of belonging next time. So we want to be tending our humanity and our adulthood so that we can be showing up in the way that the Chiron and Aries generation, all the kids that are being born right now amid such flame and strife and chaos, really know that they are loved, that they are safe as best as we can create safety for them, that their needs are met, and that they're one with the universe, one with the earth, one with the divine, one with humanity on a certain level, not to collapse their individuality, but support it and enhance it. So that's our task as adults living right now, is to heal our childhood wounds. Chiron and Aries transiting through this, and you get this for the next several years, right until 2027, you have this opportunity. And it actually entered Aries in April of 2018 and will leave Aries finally in April of 2027. So it's really interesting that it's entering and leaving in Aries season. Um, so so that is an invitation for all of us to get real about us, about our responsibility for the babies that are still being born, and to really show up for them so that they can become the heroes that we need them to be. They can become the generation that's like, I know I'm here for a reason. I'm here to clean up some of your fucking messes, all these other prior generations that have made such a mess on the planet. But I'm also here to do my thing and to really work with the chaos of my time creatively. So we want them to be those people. We want them to become the future Greta or the future whoever, right? Like these heroes that we put on a pedestal. We all have that capacity. And so we all have to show up for that capacity internally so that we can show up for the kiddos and their capacity to grow into that. And it doesn't matter if you don't have kids. It's your responsibility as an adult. Period. that's that's the shamanic teaching that I take from the cycle teachings primarily. The Mercury retrograde coming up over the next few weeks will also be illuminating a lot of these themes. What do I need to sacrifice? Can I sacrifice that wounded self that never got their birth tended? Can I go and find some ritual process to move through so that I can tend my birth retroactively? To me, that's what shamanic healing has brought into my life. So if you want references about that, check out my website or ask me on an email. Um, yeah, what am I willing to give up so that I can move forward, right? Where is my sacred ram that I need to keep here so that I can get the perspective and the blessings and the shifts that I need to happen energetically so I can move forward in a good way. Um, and the eclipses, like I said, those are known as great, really potent ritual times to unpack. You can look at the exact times, but really the exact times are always going to be bigger and more kind of fluid than we think because there's 8 billion of us on this planet and we're all kind of just getting triggered infinitely, exponentially, and all different ways by all the different transits. And the transit themselves not causing the thing, just illuminating the thing as it already exists. So that's kind of, I think, like my main piece. What else did I want to say about that? Yeah, those are the big opportunities of this month for me. And so just things to look at, things to unpack. If you want to unpack them more fully, you can book me for a chart reading pretty much at any time. If you don't see availability on my site that works for you, just shoot me an email. But another piece that I wanted to talk about is this birth gate specifically, because I do this work now as a service. So if you're pregnant, expecting, or have young children, or you have people in your life that are, do a little research on birth tending. Shoot me an email. I can send you some references. Basically, what I do when I do birth tending is I go to the helping spirits in an altered state. A journey is what we call it, of the child, and I check in with them and make sure that that connection is tended well. Receive what messages they need to bring forward for the birthing family and parents. Um, so that establishes that connection between the child and the divine here on earth, on behalf of the living that are receiving the child and the child's spirit. And then I tend sort of like what the child needs in terms of their larger process of incarnation, that soul moving down the birth channel into the body kind of thing. And so it can be done non-locally at a distance. I don't have to be in the delivery room with you, though I would love to if that's something that you feel like you really want me to do. Um, Potentially, it's a possibility. And it can be done after the fact. So even if your kiddos are young, we can go and kind of tie up the loose ends. Um, and and if they're not tie upable, I can also refer you out to like more veteran practitioners that can tie up more complex things with older kiddos, with parents, with adults, etc. But it's really such a cool process, and it really does sort of seal up that wound of incarnation and give us the belly button that we need. That, all belly buttons are going to accumulate dirt, and that's one of the teachings of chiron. All belly buttons, most of them stink, right? And my belly button always smells so bad. My partner's never. I don't know what the deal is. We have very different placements, very different incarnational experiences. So that may be part of it. You know what I mean? He's a Taurus, I'm an Aquarius. We have different relationships to our bodies. But it's just a funny thing, but it still collects lint. So everyone's belly button is going to collect something. So that's kind of the medicine of Chiron. It's unpacking what collects there, being able to have agency in our dance with life. Whereas, if I have a big gaping wound in a certain portion of my energy body that is reflected in a portion of my chart, it's going to attract things. And that's not to victim blame or shame. It's just really how life works, right? Just like a big gaping wound physically will attract infection and flies and things like that. So we can tend those wounds and we can prevent them from happening so that they become the things that they really want to be. And those may be these soft, strange animal body vulnerabilities like belly buttons, like genitals, you know what I mean? Like these parts of our body that do attract certain things and need specific care. But when they're given that care, they can just be these potent sort of flowers of creativity that they're meant to be. So that's kind of the thing that I think is coming down the pipeline. I think that's all that wanted to be said today relative to the star stuff. I'm going to tune in one more time and just see if they want me to share anything else. Just to remember on the depth level, whether you are pursuing birth tending for yourself or your child, or trying to convince your in-laws to do it, which I have done, and bless their hearts, many of them have enlisted me and paid me to do it. So that's so cool and so exciting when you journey to the child's soul and then they come out and they start to grow into that. The most bizarre synchronicities I couldn't even tell you how many of them I've experienced now that I have I think we have 6 under 6 in our little collective. And a handful of them I've birth tended or tended their birth. So, whatever you're doing, wherever you are right now, you have a purpose, you have a soul. You came here through the intact mechanisms of souls incarnating into life. None of that stuff is broken. What is broken is the human tending of that on our side of things as the living. So any of the brokenness that you may feel, that was not your fault, actually. Full stop. Now that you're an adult, what you choose to do with it, you are fully responsible for it. So that's the tricky place we find ourselves in. But every Aries season is a new beginning. And this year generally is also sort of a tying up of loose ends before a bunch of big new beginnings. Saturn moving into Aries over the next couple of years. The North Node moving into Pisces is a new cycle over the next couple of years. So lots of new beginnings happening that we're just kind of getting our ducks in a row for, frankly, as hopefully as a collective over this next calendar year. So for now, I would just see this as, okay, cool. If I'm dragging around a big old wound around my birth or my incarnation, what's my next step? How can I receive some information from spirit to point me on the right direction so that I can walk that path consciously with agency, with empowerment, um, and walk it in a way that empowers others to do the same in a good way for the sake of all of life and all the babies that are being born. Babies being born every minute and babies dying every minute, holding that complexity for sure. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have questions, shoot me emails, leave comments, share my stuff, subscribe to the Substack. Come see me in person at Inner Space in Kansas City if you want to do some movement explorations. Um, and reach out with anything. And most importantly, go and bring these energies into your life in a new way. Take some new actions. So I give thanks to the spirits below and above and in each direction, to our helping spirits and ancestral helping spirits, the spirits that hold stake in the lands and the great spirits of the lands where each of us reside, and the elements and teachers of the zodiac, the planetary teachers, the star teachers, this big earth mother teacher that holds us, and the moon and its systems for bringing souls into life on earth, and the sun and all of its big warmth and love, and to all the beings and energies that are giving us love, whether we know it or not, all around. Thank you so much. Go if you must, stay if you can. We release you with our love and gratitude. Take this grounding and whatever else you found forward into your day. Invite your body to shift now into a different space and time as you shift back into regular consciousness. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day and all the blessings as you unpack the great mystery and possibility of your life.